one particular aspect which I mentioned quickly, but I did not elaborate upon, was the idea of a unique kind of liminality that exists between a pedagogue and the structure in which a pedagogue would be located. What does it mean? I will take up this opportunity to now elaborate a little bit on that. This basically means that, a lot of critique of education have helped us understand that the problem is primarily with the structure, or the power regime of power which governs the structure. We have been able to point out fingers to some of the villains who stop us from being free-floating pedagogues. Free-floating in the sense, that we can have intellectual freedom to imagine differently, to shape up a course differently, or to conduct examination in a mode which will be more humanized kind of examination. It would not be an intimidating examination. So we have been able to recognize some of these villains. We have always pinpointed one or other kind of vice chancellor, one or other kind of principal, one or other kind of head of department, or we go to the extent of villainizing. And it's not wrong. One understands that these are the forces which curtails a pedagogue's freedom, and therefore probably rightly we have gone to villainize market forces as well, the industry, the employment market. And we go to the extent of suggesting that the kind of ideological regime which comes to power and which starts to govern us, those ideological forces are also responsible for the decline of pedagogic practices, so and so forth. We also say that structural constraints in an institution play a role in the decline of the pedagogic practices. Most of the teachers have probably forgotten about the pedagogic responsibility precisely because they have ceded their space to the professional requirements. So it's merely fulfillment of the task that one has to do. And for other kind of purposes, one has to find a way out of these kind of structures in which one is located, so and so forth. That is one way of thinking. That thinking is also enabled by the pedagogic perspective. As I told you, the aptitude of pedagogue would enable one to take note of the problems, the constraints, the limitations, the anomalies, structural anomalies. But then on the other hand, we tend to think that a pedagogue is a pure individual, which is this binary opposition between structure and agency, the collective and the individual. This binary opposition probably curtails our possibility of understanding pedagogy in the manner in which I have tried to explain. We need to see that a pedagogue, a teacher of a kind who believes in vocational existence, or of the kind who believes in professional existence, any kind of teacher is a relational entity. It's an entity which is in relation with the structure. It's not binary opposition of the structure. We are teaching a particular course to a particular group of students precisely by the virtue of our location within an institution, within a structure. So one cannot deny the importance of that institution, that structure. That is not the point here. Point is a little more than that, which means to show that our pedagogic practices will be more nuanced if we keep in our mind that we are related to the structure which we may criticize as a pedagogue, right? We are related in the sense that we are taking benefits from that structure. We are enabled by that structure. Even though we know that we are paying a price for this enabling, we are paying a price in terms of the kind of freedom that we expect. But then that is not the end of the story. That kind of criticism of structure, of the power to be, of market forces, of variety of conditioning forces is fair enough. But on the other hand, one also has to say that because of the kind of craft that is involved in pedagogy, there is always a space in between individual and collective. There is always some kind of space in between institution, structure, and individual pedagogues, right? And if one is really able to employ pedagogy as art, craft, aptitude, one would be able to see that space in between. That space in between I am calling unique liminality. In that space, liminality was an idea which came from some of the anthropologists who were trying to study rites and rituals. And they said that during the ritual performances, an individual who is going through the ritual performance is sandwiched between the pre-given structure and something which is going to happen afterwards, right? And in that space in between, the individual is free, is creatively free to do a lot of other things, right? Or to do nothing. So that kind of creative, unique space in between structure and individual is what I am eyeing at as a pedagogue's space, as a space where student and teacher can do a lot of experimentation with ideas, will have freedom to do that experimentation, and would also have freedom to come across the follies of experimentation, the failure of experimentation. So when one is, that's why I said that there would be moment of utter frustration for both students and teachers, because theoretically pedagogy entails those moments of frustration. It allows you, it helps you to recognize where the experiment with ideas can fail, right? It allows you to see as to how certain kind of experimentation are merely individuals' temporary fancies, and some other kind of experimentation may have long-lasting results. These abilities would come from a pedagogue, a student, and a teacher who is driven by the idea of pedagogy and who is able to locate oneself in this in-betweenness, right? In-betweenness is not always a bad thing. Unfortunately, a lot of poets might have, in the religious civilization, we have learned about the benefit of in-betweenness, right? Buddhist epistemology highlights this notion of in-betweenness great deal. Even in Hindu religious civilizational texts, we have discussions on the idea of in-betweenness. One has to also realize that in day-to-day life, in practical life, we are not governed by polarity. Our mind is not equal to so-called WhatsApp university. We are not governed by polarity of ideas. Instead, we are governed by the practical day-to-day ideas, the practical day-to-day concern. And that is where in-betweenness starts giving you great deal of space to think differently, to plan differently, to frame a question differently. For example, one may always ask a direct question. What is a community, from a social science student or from a sociology student, from a civics student? What is citizenship? This kind of straight questions is one kind of question. We have been habitual of asking these kind of questions. The other kind of question could be, how do you think you are a citizen? With reference to your own particular experiences, define citizenship. Now, this requires a student, and this kind of question can be asked only if you have recognized the space in between, right? If you know that you are a pedagogue in between the individual fancies of yours and the structural constraints within which you're located, in that in-betweenness, you will be experimenting with your questions as a teacher, or you would be likewise experimenting with the content that you're going to teach in the classroom. In that kind of space in between, with this kind of pedagogic imagination, a teacher will find it extremely difficult to reduce one book into 5 points, 5 bullet points, right? It would be very difficult to carry out this kind of pedagogy by using PowerPoint slides, right? Those PowerPoint slides may make your practical life easy, your students' practical life easy, but then that can be an enemy of pedagogic imagination. That can be an enemy of the pedagogic practices as well, right? Enemy in the sense that it will shrink the kind of pedagogic possibility that exists in the hand of a student and a teacher. That's where I suppose this idea of unique liminality comes into picture. Unique liminality in which pedagogic practices will flourish has to be, in the first place, recognized by the pedagogues. And in the second place, every pedagogue has to understand as to how to employ the art and craft of pedagogy in this unique liminality. In this unique liminality, you may have also another kind of frustration. Everybody, it's very easy to talk about freedom, intellectual freedom, academic freedom, freedom to teach in one manner, freedom to learn in one manner. But when freedom comes, everybody does not take it very lightly, very easily. It's not so easy to handle freedom, right? In freedom, I have seen, while practicing some of these things in my own classroom, I have seen how students go berserk with the kind of freedom that is offered. During the pandemic, I asked students right in the beginning of a course that I was teaching. The course is a discussion on philosophies of social sciences. In the very beginning, I asked students to do a kind of collaborative exercise between me as a course teacher and them as students. Do a collaborative exercise of reshaping, restructuring the whole course so that it could be executed in the online mode without any kind of uh, negative repercussions, right? Uh, I gave them freedom, the freedom was made available. Who am I to give freedom? Freedom was made available or pointed out or flagged for their convenience to understand that this possibility exists with students to reshape a course along with a teacher, in discussion with the teacher. And mind it, it was not so easy for students. They find it easier to be given a course rather than reshaping the course and taking control of their destiny as learners. Likewise, it's very easy to talk about open book exams, but when students have to give open book exams, they find great deal of difficulty in handling that temptation of copying from all sorts of sources, right? This copy paste from all sorts of sources, and they think that only by copying and pasting and a good answer could be made. So freedom is not always easy to handle. In this kind of space in between, when we are driven by pedagogy, we also learn how to handle freedom, how to utilize freedom, what to really do with freedom, right? So there are moments of frustration. There are moments of recognition that yes, this is here, but this is only so much one can do. One also realizes, as a teacher, I have always realized that the pedagogic practices might bring about very small kind of results, and that may be slightly disappointing for somebody who is seeking for something very big, something spectacular, some spectacular kind of change in aptitude, in the craftsmanship, in the ways in which students and teachers teach and learn. That need not be the moment of frustration, particularly in my view, because pedagogy is primarily to seek out smaller changes, and those smaller changes will go in the long run, would play a very significant role in the mind and life of students and teachers both in long run. I am always guided by E.F. Schumacher's that book, which was titled Small is Beautiful, and the ideas in that book. I suppose a pedagogue's dream project is for these kind of small changes which can happen in the way we do things. That's where I will stop.